The United States Navy recently released footage of one of its most impressive air-to-submarine operations ever. Here's how the U.S. Navy airdropped supplies to one of its giant submarines. In order to conduct this mind-boggling operation, the U.S. Navy utilized a huge cargo helicopter, AC-2 Greyhound, which is capable of carrying up to 9,800 pounds of cargo. But the main star of this show was the submarine itself, the USS Michigan, an Ohio-class submarine that displaces 18,758 tons of water. That's just about the size of 2 aircraft carriers stacked on top of each other. The submarine was conducting a rare port visit in Singapore, where it was open for tours and events for the public. And even though the vessel is armed with 20 nuclear missiles, enough to wipe out a whole country like Singapore, the people of the country were not afraid. The United States and Singapore have been strong allies since the 1990s, so no one was really concerned. But before we take a closer look at the airdrop, let's first take a tour of the submarine itself, as these things are so massive, they can only be built in dry docks. And here we see how the dry dock is flooded as the submarine is moved into the water. After the submarine is in the water, workers enter through the escape trunk at the top of the sail. But there are also special access tubes that can be opened underwater, allowing divers to access the submarine. In addition to the escape trunk and access tubes, submarines also have escape pods that can be launched from the top of the sail. These are usually only used in emergencies, but occasionally sailors train with them. Now let's get back to the airdrop. The first step in the operation is for the C-2 Greyhound to approach the submarine. The helicopter then lowers a basket that's attached to a crane on board the submarine. Once the basket is close enough, sailors on board the submarine grab onto it and pull it close to the escape trunk at the top of the sail. Now that the basket is close enough, a sailor grabs the line connected to the basket and pulls it taut, securing the basket to the submarine. Next, the crane lifts the basket and moves it over the escape trunk. A sailor then opens the hatch on the submarine, and the crane carefully lowers the basket into the opening. Once the basket is inside the submarine, the sailor closes the hatch. The next step is for the crane to lift the helicopter up and away from the submarine. This is important because the submarine's hatches need to be watertight. If the crane were to touch the water while it's lifting the helicopter, it could allow water to leak into the submarine. Once the helicopter is lifted clear of the submarine, the crew can begin unloading the cargo from the basket. The cargo in this case was food, ammunition, and other supplies for the submarine. Now that the cargo has been unloaded, the crane returns the empty basket to the helicopter. This part of the operation is a little bit tricky because the helicopter needs to keep its rotors turning while it's hanging from the crane. If the rotors were to slow down or stop, the helicopter could fall and crash. The crew then fastens the basket to the helicopter using ropes. Once the basket is secure, the helicopter takes off and returns to its base. Submarines can stay submerged for months at a time, so it's important that they have a way to resupply without having to surface. Airdropping supplies to a submarine is one way to do this. Another way is to use a sonar to guide a small unmanned vehicle to the submarine, so the submarine then uses a manipulator arm to retrieve the supplies. These operations are dangerous and require a lot of practice. The first attempt at airdropping supplies to a submarine was made in 1962. It was until 1964 that the United States Navy developed a successful method of airdropping supplies to submarines. Today, the United States Navy has a number of different methods for airdropping supplies to submarines. The most common type of delivery is the low-altitude delivery. During a low-altitude delivery, the submarine is submerged and the helicopter approaches the submarine from above. Once the helicopter is close enough, it releases the supplies, and the supplies sink to the bottom, where they are retrieved by a remotely operated vehicle. This is the most dangerous type of delivery because if the supplies hit the submarine, they could damage the submarine's pressure hull. However, this type of delivery is also the most likely to succeed because the submarine is submerged and the helicopter is coming from above. Another type of delivery is the high-altitude delivery. During a high-altitude delivery, the submarine is surfaced and the helicopter approaches the submarine from above. As the helicopter is close enough, it releases the supplies, and the supplies land on the deck of the submarine. This type of delivery is less dangerous than the low-altitude delivery, but it's also less likely to succeed because the submarine needs to be surfaced. This makes the submarine vulnerable to attack. and it also makes it more difficult to retrieve the supplies, regardless of the type of delivery. Airdropping supplies to a submarine is a complex operation that requires a lot of practice and coordination. The United States Navy has a number of different exercises that it conducts to practice this type of operation. One of the most important exercises is the ASW air-to-submarine warfare exercise. During this exercise, the United States Navy practices both offensive and defensive air-to-submarine warfare tactics. The exercise typically involves multiple submarines and multiple aircraft. The submarines are hidden from the aircraft, and the aircraft are trying to find and track the submarines. The submarines are also trying to track the aircraft, and they're trying to avoid being detected. This exercise is designed to test the skills of the crew of the submarines and the aircraft. It also tests the equipment and systems that are used to detect, track, and engage submarines. Another important exercise is the ASURF air-to-surface warfare exercise. During this exercise, the United States Navy practices offensive and defensive air-to-surface warfare tactics. The exercise typically involves multiple surface ships and multiple aircraft. The surface ships are hidden from the aircraft, and the aircraft are trying to find and track the surface ships. The surface ships are also trying to track the aircraft, and they're trying to avoid being detected. This exercise is designed to test the skills of the crew of the surface ships and the aircraft. It also tests the equipment and systems that are used to detect, track, and engage surface ships. These exercises are important because they allow the crew of submarines and aircraft to practice the skills and procedures that they need to know to perform their duties. They also allow the United States Navy to test its equipment and systems and make sure that they're ready to defend the United States. Now, although the U.S. Navy can refuel its nuclear-powered submarines underwater indefinitely, the crew still needs to eat. And this is where the airdrops come in handy. Unlike aircraft carriers, submarines don't have a way to cook food, so all of their food is either canned or frozen. Submarine crews typically eat MREs, which is short for meals ready to eat. MREs are designed to be lightweight and easy to transport. They also need to be able to withstand the harsh conditions that exist on submarines. Mr. E's are made up of a number of different components. There's a main dish, which can be something like chicken, beef, or vegetarian lasagna. There's also a side dish, which might be fruit, vegetables, or rice. In addition to the main dish and the side dish, there's also a dessert, which can be something like cookies or brownies. Mr. E's also come with a number of accessories. There's a water activation pouch, which is used to heat the meal and make it more palatable. There's also a chewing gum and candy, as well as a number of different condiments. The United States Navy has a long history of providing meals to its sailors. In fact, the Navy's first cookbooks date back to the early 1800s. Back then, meals on board Navy ships were typically pretty basic. Sailors ate things like boiled beef and pork with potatoes and cabbage. But as the Navy grew and became more sophisticated, so did its cuisine. Today, Navy cooks are trained to prepare a wide variety of dishes from around the world. They also have access to a wide range of ingredients thanks to the Navy's worldwide supply chain. This means that sailors on board Navy ships today enjoy a much wider variety of food than their predecessors did. Airdropping supplies to a submarine is a dangerous operation, but it's also an important one. It allows submarines to stay submerged for months at a time, which makes them more difficult to detect and track. It also gives them the ability to quickly receive supplies if they need them. If you enjoyed this video, check out another one of my videos about the USS Gerald R. Ford. It's the newest and most advanced aircraft carrier in the world. We'll see you next time.